Hello everyone. Here we are going to discuss the subject of environmental science. In environmental science, we are going to discuss the subtitle of ecosystem and ecology. The ecosystem and ecology that you already know about that. In the earth surface, the living and non-living organisms, how they are moving on and the growth of that, the living organisms of ecosystem, how it is maintaining. That is what we are going to discuss here. See, the ecosystem, which generally we can discuss about for living organisms, for all the things, for human beings, animals, insects, so all the things we are moving on that. The name which have been ecology or ecosystem have been derived from the 1869 by the Henkel from the German scientist. He have described the name and described the subject called newly ecological or ecosystem, which have been including all the living organisms together in the earth surfaces. So that we futurely we have taken a subject like botany, zoology, or some other subject we are still moving on. We are commonly studying about that at environmental. So definition, the ecology is the study of interactions among organisms or group of organisms. So the interactions which we are knowing is the living organisms. We are discussing about the living organisms, either a single living organism or a group of living organisms with their environment. The environment consists of both biotic component and abiotic components. Abiotic and abiotic differing here, they are living and non-living organisms. The definition is the ecological that we are studying about the living organisms or a group of organisms or single organisms in the earth, both about the biotic and abiotic, living and non-living organisms in the earth surfaces. Some of the main important sources of energies or important sources of things in the earth surfaces, but we are considering as non-living organisms, like non-living component in the environment, light, water, wind, nutrients in soil, heat, solar radiations, atmosphere. So many things will be there. So these are the main important things. Without the following things, the living organisms can't able to live in the earth surfaces. But the non-living components, what we are taking over, giving importance in the environment is the following some examples. The living organisms, as everyone knows, like human beings, plants, animals, microorganisms in soil, etc. So all the living organisms, the bacteria, algae, all we are considering it as a living organisms. Yeah, biotic organism and non-living or abiotic organisms or components. In the ecosystem, when we are considering, we have to consider all the things: land areas, aquatic areas, and filling up of animals, filling up of areas, filling up of plants. If all together if you are considering, that will be called as ecosystem. In the year of 1935, the ecosystem or biological community has been created. What the community which means? All the things, biotic and abiotic things. Trees or water, heat energy, solar energy, radiations, human beings, bacteria, algae, all together we are consuming as an ecosystem. So that we are in 1935, the ecosystem of community have been prepared by the scientists of Germany in the German. So in the following of ecosystems that we already taken the things, a group of organisms interacting as a single or group of organisms from which one another can be a living or non-living energies of matters. So ecosystem, which means we are taking over one or two energies of sources. In that energies of sources, what we are taking over, we are equaling the matter by the uses of air, the human beings or living beings. Like that the examples of maybe to go on. So this is what is small examples here. The ecosystem of living and non-living. So living, which in this is the plant areas, aquatic animals, human beings, and non-living, which in this is air, heat, energies, and that are the some of the non-living things. We going to check it out. As we already discussed, There is two kind of structures of the biotic and non-abiotic. The term structures which involves in this the living and non-living organisms, how we are getting interact with them, or how we are connecting the living and non-living organisms or non-living components in the collaboration. That is what plant, animal, microorganisms, right, etc. In the classification of biotic components, a living organisms, there is a three kind of classification: a producer, consumer, and decomposer. So the producer, which means plant, it was giving some of the energy sources or some of the food materials to the energy. The consumer, the consuming of plant, which means animals, and human beings. That is what consumers, the plant which giving the energy sources, and consumers or the animals and human beings. Then decomposers, which means after the end life of the animals, that will be taken over by the microorganisms. Again, the microorganisms will be moved on for the plants. So this is one of the cycling system and also the classification of biotic component systems. Right? We can discuss it clearly here. The producers. The producers which we already discussed is plant. The plant which in the sense it have been taking some of the energies from the non-living components like sun, water, from heat energy was taking photosynthesis. That we already commonly known thing. So the living organism plant that have been taking energy from the non-living components and it will be growing up and it will be giving some of the gases out, CO2, H2O. So water but we will be taking over and it will be producing water. So those are the common things in the atmosphere carrier. So some of the examples of how the water have been taking over and how the chemical reactions have been taking over from the sun energies. See the algae, grass, fish, all are coming under the living organisms. Here next point is consumers. The consumers are also called heterotrophs. The consumer, which means what we, the human beings or animals, what we consuming from the plants. So consumer is the primary of herbivorous or plant eaters. That we are known that if you are eating only veg plants, then there will be a herbivorous. And the components of primary things are for instead of food, that we require some of the food derivatives. So we are taking over plants and some energies. And secondary consumers. The secondary consumer which is eating the same animal to animal, the snake eating the frog, for like kind of example, that are the secondary periods. This is some of the examples here. The producer, the primary consumer, and it will be taken over by the some of the insects or something. Then it will be taken over by the secondary consumer. Then will be by the third consumer. Right? This one kind of examples how the ecosystem have been recycling over. After the primary consumer, if the life of the bird has been over, it will be taken over by the microorganisms. Then the microorganisms will be taken by the producer. So this is one of the cycling system in the ecosystem. That we already discussed herbivorous and omnivorous. Herbivorous, which means the eating of plants and leaves are herbivorous. Omnivorous, the eating of meat and any of the parts of animals that are omnivorous, both plant and animals. So that the last thing, decomposers. So decomposers are we already discussed, some bacteria, microorganisms, fungi items that after the waste materials of keeping over in the soil or some more, we are dumping. The bacteria will it change and taking over the materials. That is what decomposes. So these three are the main thing of biotic things: producers, consumers, and decomposers. So then we can move on for the abiotic, a non-living component. Then as discussed, we are going to discuss about the abiotic and non-living components. What are the non-living components as we all discussed on? The climate, soil, water, air, energies. These are the non-living components. How is directly or physically contact with the living organisms? This is what the things we are going to discuss here. The physical components will be included the energy, climate, nutrition, living spaces that the biological community needs. See, the living organisms what required. So that if we giving physically components, if some of the required things by the living organisms, if that giving by the non-living components, which means physical components like air, water, soil, sunlight, and etc. Chemical components. They are the sources of essential nutrients. The organic substances like protein, lipids, carbohydrates, etc. Inorganic substances like all micro level organisms or micro level chemical things what we are utilizing for the living purposes. These are the three examples: the land, soil, water, air or heat energies. The three non-living components that how physically contact with the living organisms. The types of ecosystems are there in that natural ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystem and aquatic ecosystem. Natural, terrestrial, aquatic. Terrestrial is land ecosystem and aquatic is water ecosystem. The natural ecosystem, this operate themselves under natural conditions. Basically on habitable types, it can be further classified into three types. So terrestrial ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem. In aquatic ecosystem, there are two kinds of things: freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. And third one is man-made or artificial ecosystem. So in natural ecosystem, there are three segregations: terrestrial, or aquatic, and man-made artificial ecosystem. In aquatic, we have two categories: freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. In terrestrial ecosystem, this ecosystem is related to land surface. For example, grassland ecosystem, forest, desert ecosystem. So whatever the land, desert or forest, it will be considered as a terrestrial ecosystem. Aquatic ecosystem, which will be all based upon the water. If the area covered with the water, we are considering it aquatic ecosystem. In that we have two categories: freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. The marine ecosystem is fully covered up with sea areas and seashore areas. Remaining all the things, river, pond, and the flowing of waters, well, all will be considered as freshwater ecosystem. In that we have two categories: running water ecosystem, for example, river, streams, etc. and standing water ecosystem, pond, lake, well, and etc. These are the two categories of freshwater ecosystem. In marine ecosystem, sea and seashores are the two examples. Man-made or artificial ecosystems. This is for the two things. Artificial ecosystem is operated or maintained by the man himself. For example, crop plant adults. So for in the land, if you are producing any of the crops that are coming under the man-made ecosystem or artificial ecosystem. So main important thing here in the types of ecosystem. Types of ecosystem we have generally natural ecosystem. In that we have three kind of ecosystem: terrestrial, aquatic, and artificial man-made. In aquatic we have two categories: freshwater and marine ecosystem. In freshwater we have two things: running water ecosystem and standing water ecosystem. Then we can move on for the functions of ecosystem. Right? In functions of ecosystem, there are primary, secondary, and tertiary. We have three kind of functions in the ecosystem. The primary ecosystem, which all ecosystem is manufactured or starch photosynthesis, which means all taking over by the starches or leaves or with the help of photosynthesis only by the sunlight. If you are taking over the energy in that primary functions. Secondary functions, so all ecosystem is distributing energy in the form of food to all the consumers. That we have seen the three kinds: producer, consumer and decomposer. In that, the things what they are giving for the consumer, that is for the secondary ecosystem. Take an ecosystem of all living system died at the particular stage. The dead system or decomposed to the intimate layer, third function of ecosystem, namely cycling. That what the decomposers called microorganisms ecosystems. The first primary is here, the common producer. Secondary ecosystem is here, consumers like animals or human beings. Then third is here, decomposure, tertiary functions. That decomposing or defertilizing or recycling method by the microorganisms. So the major functions of ecosystem what we have discussed. There are the following four things that we have to take over by the ecosystems, or we have to be studied before starting or before taking over the ecosystem areas as all. Energy and material flow, food chain, food web and food pyramid. These are the major and main important things what we are going to discuss in the ecosystem areas. The energy and material which synthesis, what kind of energy that we required or what kind of material that we required for the next movement of producers and consumers. Food chain, food webs and food pyramid are the same cycle. For example, food pyramid, which means from the plant organisms, herbivorous to omnivorous, how they are eating circle will be there in the cycles. There may be the plant eating animals will be there. In the same living organisms, some of the animals will be eat any other organisms. Then human beings, some like frog eating by a snake, snake eating by eagles. Then eagles if dead, it will be taken over by the microorganisms. Then it will be one of the cycling movement. So that is what food pyramids. How much time passed? Energy flow in the ecosystem. Next we are going to discuss about the flow of energy in the ecosystem. In that there are some certain things of energy required for the living organisms. That are the solar energy that used only for the plant death. Solar energy is transferred to chemical energy in photosynthesis by the plants. That are the common things, the primary objectives what we already know when we are using in the producers level. And some amount of chemical energy is used by the plant for their growth, and the remaining is transferred to consumers by the process of eating. The same cycle what we are moving on again, producers, consumer, decompose. Thus the energy enters the ecosystem through photosynthesis and passes through the different trophies level or feeding levels. The common thing, how the energy taking over in the living organisms. Like heat energy is one kind of non-living components and plant is on the other hand of living organisms. How the biotic and abiotic things jointly togetherly working, that is the one of the examples here. In the living plant organism, the non-living components heat or sunlight which passes through as a chemical energy for their growth of living organisms. That is the functions of or flow of energy in the ecosystems. This is what the block diagram for understanding. The sunlight which can be taken over the producers. The producers which means the sunlight, the heat energy which required from the producers. Here the producers were coming under plant. And for the consumers will also require the heat energy, sunlight. The animals, human beings like that. Then after that decomposers. Decomposers which means microorganisms which decomposing the animals or human beings, that which also require the heat energy. So the heat energy or sunlight which not required thing is the inorganic materials or nutrients if you are additionally adding in them. The only thing, the heat energy will not be required there. The flow of energy in an ecosystem of law of thermodynamics. So is the most critical point that what we are going to discuss here. We can directly move for food chains. Okay. These are some of the examples of food chain. See, for example, already seen the grass will be eaten by some of the producers, or the producer, consumer, primary consumer, secondary consumer and tertiary consumers. Right? Some examples of food chains. how the ecosystem has been moving equally. In the food chain areas, the common thing what required for all the things, for producer or primary consumers, secondary and tertiary consumers, for all the things are undecomposed bacteria. The common thing required is nutrition, heat energy, and also the water. These are the three things. In this, the three things, what are the non-living components are heat, water, and nutrition. The three are the non-living components which directly approaches with the living organisms. Continue பண்ணவா? So that we have discussed some of the things in ecosystem as well as the food chain. So we can detailedly discuss about the food cycle, food chain and the food pyramid in the upcoming classes. Thank you.